Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast, How Pharma is Reinventing Patient Engagement. I'm Amber Lowry, the Senior Editor of Special Projects for Pharmaceutical Executive, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We're pleased to bring you this webcast presented by Pharmaceutical Executive and sponsored by VMS Biomarketing. I would like to share a statement from our sponsor. VMS Biomarketing is the leading provider of nurse-led patient and HCP support solutions for biopharma. Using behavioral health and analytical models, the company's singular focus over 25 years has been clinical nurse educator programs that provide the high-touch, personalized support necessary to help patients successfully start and stay on therapy. We have a few important announcements before we begin. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and we encourage you to ask questions during the event. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small square icon in the upper right-hand corner of the slide window, or by hovering your mouse over the lower right-hand corner and dragging the window to the desired size. The slides will advance automatically during the event. If you have any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click on the question mark help widget in the dock at the bottom of your presentation window. I would now like to introduce today's speaker. We're pleased to be joined today by Andrea Heslin-Smiley. Andrea Heslin-Smiley serves as President and Chief Executive Officer of VMS Biomarketing. She joined VMS in 2008 to lead the company's strategic marketing and brand development business units and was named President and CEO in 2011. Prior to joining VMS, Andrea spent 18 years at Eli Lilly and Company, leading multiple business units and product strategies. She is an industry expert on patient and provider engagement and adherence, and she consults with a wide range of leading biopharma company clients, providing advice on strategy, adherence, and behavior change with a particular focus on rare disease. She is a regularly invited speaker and panel member at industry conferences and serves on the boards of directors of Rockwell Medical Inc. and Assertio, formerly Xyla Life Sciences. She earned her BA in economics from DePaul University, where she was an honors management fellow. Thanks so much for joining us today, Andrea. Please go ahead and get us started.
Thanks so much, Amber. Okay, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. As Amber said, I'm Andrea Heslin-Smiley. Everyone calls me Andy. So Andy Smiley, I'm the CEO of VMS Biomarketing. As Amber said, I spent 20 years prior leading various business units at Eli Lilly. So at VMS, we know patients, and for 25 years, we've empowered our biopharma manufacturers to build and develop authentic relationships with their patients. And to do this, we leverage a platform that we call One Voice that uniquely combines data-driven technology with human interactions and interventions to deliver this holistic patient support in a dynamic and very personalized way. And through these patient engagement programs, our clients have been able to not only build lasting connectivity with their consumers, with the patients, but also deliver this differentiated patient experience that's enhanced through rich, real-world data and insights. So today I'm excited to talk about what we've seen as this transformation that's happening in patient engagement space. What used to be sort of a fringe part of the commercial strategy is now core and essential to the way many companies view the driving prescription pull-through, improving therapy adherence, and increasing brand loyalty. And this rapid growth and investment in the patient engagement space has also led to a tremendous amount of innovation, which I'm excited to talk about as we work as an industry to shape what the future of maybe patient engagement 2.0 will look like. So first slide. Okay, so we all know this. Pharma puts this inordinate amount of effort into the time of prescription. There's a combination of reps and non-personal promotion, DTC, so much more. This total investment and energy of $30 billion annually, and we know that grows year over year. But despite all the work and all the ROI studies that are done to see the level of MBRX that was achieved to get to that point of prescription, we still so suffer as an industry from what happens after the first RX is written. We know across the board that 20 to 30%, and this is even higher for higher expense drugs, but 20 to 30% of patients never even start on the therapy. So the script is written, never actually started, and those that do start, we know that over half have dropped off at the first year mark. And beyond the negative impacts on patient outcomes, clearly, if you can't start or you don't stay on therapy, you're not going to get the outcomes that patients are expecting and that the HCPs were wanting patients to have, that were seen in the clinical trials. But it's more than just the patient outcomes. What we find that there's this missed opportunity for pharma is also in having just a better overall patient experience and consumer sentiment towards the industry. I'm not sure if everyone's aware of this, but this is very disappointing that currently consumers and patients, consumers, we're all patients, we're all consumers, they rank pharma at 5.2 on a scale of 100 in terms of NPS, the Net Promoter Score, which is so far below not just other healthcare constituents, but so much farther below other consumer-facing industries. Next slide, please. So over the past few years, I think what we've seen is that pharma companies that do prioritize patient engagement have been able to capitalize on all this upfront momentum that's established in getting to the patient prescribing, getting the patient prescribed the product. So just an example is, in a patient engagement program we're delivering right now in the neuroscience space, we've empowered our client to increase their first fill rate by 67% from baseline levels, while also elevating the first fill volume, which was not at the right therapeutic level, and so that was increased by 100% relative to pre-program levels. And this type of impact we see throughout our programs, and I know many other service providers do as well. And it allows them, biopharma, to fully maximize the opportunity on what we see are sort of two fronts. First, and most important, is the ability to improve the quality of life and health outcomes of your patients by increasing the first fill, medication adherence, and helping patients realize full clinical potential of your product. And then there's this byproduct of that increased patient success is sort of this growth, of course, to the commercial bottom line. By reducing first script abandonment, companies can obviously, you grow the volume of patients on their products, and then by improving the long-term medication adherence, clearly there's a direct correlation to that significant uptake in the patient long-term value. So next slide, thank you. So beyond this impact to the commercial bottom line, which is significant, and obviously most importantly is that it's outcome focused, or the patients are going to, again, achieve the results that they deserve. There are several recent market dynamics that have further elevated the importance of patient engagement for many manufacturers. As we continue the shift, first of all, from volume to value-based care, biopharma is being pushed to adopt successful patient engagement strategies that leverage evidence-based approaches to driving better outcomes. At the same time, consumers are experiencing customer service practices in other industries that truly delight in whole new ways. I mean, when we think about our relationship with Amazon and the Googles of the world and, you know, all the different numerous direct-to-consumer companies across the board, there's a new bar that has been set on what it means to delight your customer. And so the expectations of patients, again, who are consumers, has elevated, and we're woefully behind that across the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, both patients and HCPs expect more of pharma today than they did 5 years ago. A big driver of this is healthcare consumerism movement. In a recent, I think it was Accenture study, it was found that 76% of patients felt that pharma has a responsibility to provide tools and services. I mean, a responsibility, I think that's really important. And likewise, we see that 50% of physicians agree that they are more likely to prescribe medications from pharma companies that are more patient-centric. So this sentiment has been furthered by recent impacts of the pandemic. We've all felt it. COVID-19 has placed unprecedented demands and a strain on the healthcare system and has accelerated the need for patient centricity and heightened what patients are looking for from pharma. And then lastly, I think probably one of the most important is that we just have the social responsibility to be addressing the differing needs of patient segments, particularly those that are underserved and often been missed by so many of our pharma commercialization practices. So investing in these sort of at-risk, underserved populations through personalized patient engagement strategies that are focusing on those particular needs can go a long way to really provide a needed civic duty and to address pharma corporate reputation. But honestly, I think it's just really the right and necessary thing to do. So next slide. All these factors have led to this increased focus on pharma patient engagement strategies that are, again, not only important to the patient, but they generate a true competitive advantage for the brand. And this increased focus is substantiated by the growth of investment that we've seen in patient-centric services. Another study by Accenture that was done late last year reported that 85% of companies are raising their investment in patient-centric capabilities over the next 18 months. We're already into that 18 months, and we continue to see this growth. In fact, this should account for 17% year-over-year growth in patient services above what is currently a $14 billion spend level. So it's outpacing the overall healthcare sector in spend and in growth. I think we can agree that it's about time that differentiated patient engagement has come to the forefront. We see it in the consumer products that we're engaging with every day, and I think all of us that have been in pharma for some time have often talked about we need to be as good as consumer products are and product management is. And the traditional model that we have been using for patient engagement is lacking on so many fronts. And what is needed is for truly a much more patient-centric perspective. I'm going to talk about exactly what that looks like. First of all, let's just think about what the model is today. We're all patients, and I'm sure all of us have experienced this. When we think about when someone's starting on a new therapy, there's so many aspects of engagement across the patient that lack cohesiveness, and they're honestly sort of full of contradictions and confusions. And rather than thinking about what would be most seamless and easy for the patient, what we often do is we're simply sort of putting new services out there and thinking about sort of individualized operational efficiency. It's easier to have sort of each entity, each sort of part of the patient support program ecosystem kind of work within their own silo. And I think that's often what happens. But what we know is it's this highly disjointed experience for the patient. And each of these entities that are engaging with the patient, whether it be the hub or even the provider office, the SP, adherence coach, whatever it is, they each can address sort of one aspect of the patient's need. However, none is responsible kind of throughout the patient journey and connecting all the dots. And it is this lack of patient centricity to patient engagement that has long fraught our industry with problems, and the reason we have the first prescription abandonment and the non-adherence, and as well the low levels of brand sentiment. And so that will take us to, Amber, our first polling question to ask about where should we focus on patient engagement.
Excellent. Thank you, Andi. So at this time, I'd like to ask our audience to participate in a brief polling question. Please click directly on the screen to enter your answers. So here's our first question. As biopharma continues to increase its focus and investment in patient engagement, what areas do you think should be prioritized for this innovation? streamlining the overall patient experience from time of RX onwards, optimizing the right resource allocation by patient, further personalizing patient support, making patient support dynamic based on real-time information, and capturing insights and turning it into actionable data for pharma. Again, as biopharma continues to increase its focus and investment in patient engagement, what areas do you think should be prioritized for innovation? Streamlining the overall patient experience from time of RX onwards, optimizing the right resource allocation by patient, further personalizing patient support, making patient support dynamic based on real-time information, and capturing insights and turning it into actionable data for pharma. I'll just give our audience another brief moment to respond. And I believe we can probably take a look at the results. Interesting. So 23% of our audience thinks that streamlining the overall patient experience from time of RX onwards should be prioritized. But then I see now almost 35% say that making patient support dynamic based on real-time information should be prioritized as well. So how do you feel about that, Andi?
I think this is great. I mean, there's not a right answer, as I'm sure everybody knows. It's just good to sort of see where the disproportionate prioritization. And I actually love, we're going to talk a little bit about this dynamic real-time information, which I think is not done nearly as much as we need. So really interesting. I think it's also interesting how few people sort of saw the optimizing the right resource allocation by patient. Okay, this is great. So let's actually talk about each of these. Thanks, Amber. So there is this new generation of patient engagement programs that are going to touch on all these different innovations that we talk about. And it's creating this integrated environment where human engagement, technology, and data coexist in symbiosis to set this like new standard of what patient-centric engagement looks like. And obviously there is been this tremendous amount of innovation focused on delivering these innovative models. And there's sort of a number of them that I think are sort of important to touch on. Leveraging technology to deploy scalable and personalized human engagement, while also capturing real-world data on health outcomes, establishing, which is truly sort of an evidence and insights engine that can feed innovative commercial arrangements, as well as also capturing experience, operational, and other patient data, feeding this continuous improvement loop on the patient engagement program, and then back to the answers that we just saw, allowing sort of real-time changes to really address the needs of the patient in the moment. So the focus of all these innovations can best be categorized in the 5 key areas that we just outlined in the polling questions. And each of which I'm going to sort of go into in a little more detail to provide tangible examples of how we've seen our pharma partners incorporating innovation in these areas into their programs. Next slide. The first, to streamline the patient experience, we see many companies have started to leverage this primary point of contact engagement model versus the slide that we showed before, which showed all sort of roads kind of siloed and constituents engaged with the patient at different points of time, and not all of it sort of in a cohesive manner. So this primary point of contact often starts to engage right at the time that the script is written, and it stays with the patient throughout the patient journey, through ongoing support, adherence phases, all through obviously the reimbursement, every aspect, so that it ensures sort of the support is pulled through persistency and all compliance as well. But this provides this patient this continuous go-to resource. They have someone they can trust and rely on at each stage of the journey. And most importantly, this person can also engage in this progressive dialogue, which again allows them to also continue to adapt and address patient needs as they change. And what we've seen is that having this dialogue with the patient from the start, that this primary point of contact, and we are particularly not calling it single point, there's no way that other folks within the ecosystem are not going to need to, and they obviously have to engage with the patient. The idea here is having someone as sort of this primary that can put it all into context. And we know that having someone who's working through all those different aspects with the patient allows them to better recognize the needs, the wants, the preferences, and behaviors that change to maximize the impact of each engagement. Through this model, this primary point of contact can build deep and sustained relationships with your patient, and it allows for also, if you have a deeper relationship, you're pulling richer insights are captured that can then enable the pharma company to have sort of a greater connection and understanding with their patients. The type of resource that is used often by different manufacturers in this type of primary point of contact model can vary based on the disease state, the product type, patient type. Often we see it's a clinical resource that's used, but there's also non-clinical resources that are used as well, and social workers. There's a number of different models that get used. Either, whatever sort of that model is, this resource should have the background, the skills, experience, and critically the training that acts and allows them to be the expert in providing updates, guidance, triaging when needed, and most importantly, ensuring that the patient is driving towards the right health outcomes at each step of the process. That's sort of one of the first innovations. So while patient engagement company, while the patient engagement company is at sort of the forefront, and so we're saying, you know, that individual that is that company that is focused on and providing sort of the platform for the patient engagement, they are responsible for pulling through all the best-in-breed services that the manufacturer that they're working for has invested in across the whole patient support system ecosystem and the stakeholders. So that's the hub, the copay, the PAP providers. There's lots of different individuals that are obviously engaged in the patient. And key to making this model successful is making sure that your patient engagement company that's acting as this primary point of contact seamlessly integrates, ideally via sort of real-time two-way API feeds, with your broader patient support provider ecosystem. So in this schematic, it's sort of simplified, but it does show that there's this two-way integration that is critical and how it should be seamless. This level of integration allows for two very critical things to happen. First is that the primary point of contact that is interfacing with your patient has the 360-degree view into the patient's profile. They're knowing everything from the status of what's going on with benefits investigation and verification to upcoming medication shipment dates, and ensuring that they always have the necessary information on hand to best engage and address questions for the patient. The second thing is it allows for the primary point of contact to feed data back to, first of all the other partners in the PSP ecosystem. And real-time insights from interactions with patients can drive sort of timely actions by other partners to then make sure nothing slips between the cracks. So again, back to the polling question, it's enabling not only the patient engagement provider to be able to make the right changes for the patient, but it's ensuring that everyone has information that allows them to be the best partner for the patient. And that will take us to our next polling question, Amber.
Great, thank you. So now I'd like to ask our audience to participate in our second polling question. Please click directly on the screen to enter your answers. Here's the question. On a scale of 1 to 5, where would you say your organization is in leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning applications to mine patient insights and data from your patient engagement efforts? Not using it, limited utilization, some utilization, frequent utilization, or robust utilization. One more time, on a scale of 1 to 5, where would you say your organization is in leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning applications to mine patient insights and data from your patient engagement efforts? Not using it, limited utilization, some utilization, frequent utilization, or robust utilization. All right, so let's take a look at the results. Okay, interesting. So unfortunately, we're seeing that the bulk of respondents indicated that their company is not using it yet, or actually limited utilization. That's a little bit more inspiring. So what do you think about that, Andi?
Yeah, I think that's, I don't know if we'd probably all believe it if it was showed like robust utilization. We know that this is still early, again, as we're trying to catch up with consumer product companies. Our need to utilize it more and more, I think, is going to be critical. Because we have so much robust data and almost so much that we don't know what to do with it unless we are using sort of tech and AI to help us get to what that data means. So is it surprising? But it's encouraging that there's at least some good limited utilization. So let me then jump into some aspects then about sort of technology and AI. So first of all, utilizing sort of a primary point of contact model in the past was often associated with being this high-touch, costly, human capital heavy model. And that doesn't make sense for all pharma products. Another reason why it's so important that we are, using technology and AI is that this belief no longer holds true that we need to always apply human capital to have sort of a robust experience. And companies with products that vary from very low to very high WAC are leveraging this primary point of contact models that in fact is utilizing technology as well as human capital. And to do that in a way that maximizes ROI, you must be incredibly intelligent about resource allocation. This is what has led to sort of the next innovation area within patient engagement. The idea that to provide the right level of support to every patient, each patient on your product should be treated independently, and the support that they get should be unique to them. So forward-leaning patient engagement providers have begun incorporating algorithms into their models that best determine the right mix of human versus automated connection for each patient on your product. So for example, a patient who's at higher risk of medication non-adherence would get typically more human intervention related to someone at lower risk that may be sufficiently supported through automated connections or automated behavioral nudges. At the core of the strategy is the belief that you can't deliver the best health outcomes with just human intervention or just automated technology-led intervention. It's the optimal combination, which varies by patient, that has been proven to deliver maximized impact. Next slide, please. And beyond personalizing patient engagement based on the ratio of human versus automated intervention, innovative patient engagement models are further tailoring support to the patient type using advanced analytics and patient feedback. So at the highest level, and this is table stakes, I think everyone is aware of this, that at the sort of the first piece of getting to this more personalized approach is customizing based on sort of the patient journey, based on the disease state, the product type, patient population, HCP population, et cetera. So that, a patient engagement model in type 2 diabetes will look very different than it does in a rare disease like alpha-1 or factor 5. And even in sort of autoimmune disease, the patient engagement for the same biologic obviously looks a lot different across the different types of indications and patient types. So, however, companies are now going further. So once you have it based specific on the product type and the patient and the indication, all that, there is more customization that needs to happen at a patient level by using predictive analytics to assess each patient's adherence risk score. So these models are based on demographics, psychographics, medical history, and social determinants of health. And it's kind of pulled from sort of and aggregated from various data sources, but by combining these inputs into, an algorithm, mathematical model, a patient then can be scored on a scale from 1 to 100, 1 being the lowest levels of medication adherence risk and 100 being the highest. And so then combining that score, that's still not even enough. So we've taken the patient journey and then we've done adherence risk, but we still need to incorporate some other aspects to make it really sort of personalized, and that's patient preferences and the patient's learning style. Patient engagement journeys are then being able to be designed really specifically to the needs and sort of the requirements of what will sort of change behavior of a patient, and influencing things like what's the number of interventions that there should be, what are the timing of the interventions, the topics that should be covered, the tone that should be used, the type of health coach that is working with the patient, the format of the intervention. Are they a visual learner, or do they want to, have sort of very swift, efficient communications, and that's effective for them? So there's been this, as there should be, rapid movement away from one-size-fits-all model, and it's now we're elevated to sort of the quality impact of patient interventions that biopharma is delivering, which are truly have the opportunity to be much more impactful. And I think Mackenzie said this best in a recent article, that personalization and the empathy and connection that go with it, so it's not just personalization, empathy and connection that go with it, are more critical now more than ever. Okay, so then getting to, when we look at the sort of evolution of personalized patient engagement, it was quickly realized that just upfront personalization of the patient support journey wasn't enough. And this was, again, one of the, the highest response from the polling question. The fact of the matter is that we know that patients' adherence risk, their needs, behaviors, they're all changing and they're evolving, and even by the very introduction of having a new medication changes who they are. So some of the data that we're pulling from past behavior really isn't even as relevant once they're going on this new therapy. And so these ebbs and flows are happening throughout their time on therapy. And given that we know that things aren't static, to really maximize the impact of patient engagement, the support has not only be personalized, but it has to be dynamic and on an ongoing basis. And it sounds like I'm just preaching to the choir here because that's what everybody was reinforcing. But it needs to be shaping itself to what is best suited for that specific patient in the moment that they're in. So to enable dynamic patient engagement, solution providers are tapping into a host of different real-time, real-world data sources to guide how the patient engagement that is being provided needs to be adapted. Example would be some of the data sources included, there's patient feedback, there's progress, there's patient sentiment analysis from conversations, new information that's coming from other solution providers in the PSP ecosystem, and even patient-generated health data from wearables like Apple Watch or the Fitbit, or through mobile apps like Noom or even Headspace. So there's all this rich data that can be used to further personalize, but in a dynamic way. And through these data sources, your patient engagement provider can then have visibility into the changes that are happening with the patient, and then properly adjust the patient support based on their ongoing needs. So for example, if the patient is progressing through their support journey quicker than anticipated, and the feedback is that they are comfortable managing their therapy, and it likely makes sense to change their mix of human versus automated connection that was planned and shift it towards more automated and self-serve type of support. At the same time, these data sources can be used for what's called just-in-time adaptive interventions. This is a term that was coined by the American Psychological Association. And it is providing an intervention in the moment that it's needed. And if, for example, a patient's activity levels on their Apple Watch change drastically from their baseline levels, it could be a signal that there's a change in the status of the patient. It could be that they're in flare. It could be a number of different things. But it could then prompt for an opportunity to reach out to the patient and to better understand exactly what is going on. Not to sort of jump to conclusions that they know that there might be a particular situation, but to just reach out and see if there's any type of support that the patient needs at that time. A patient's time on therapy is never static, and we know so much of how a patient progresses, expands way beyond the medicine. So having this broader view in real time of the patient and how they're doing can enable truly dynamic support, ensuring that interventions are happening when they need to and in a way that's most helpful to the patient. Next slide. Got it. Thank you. So the final area of focus of innovation in patient engagement has been enhancing how data is captured, mined, and made actionable. And there's so much opportunity here. What's unique about patient engagement providers like VMS is, unlike many other PCP providers or other stakeholders, we have sort of this direct ongoing relationship with your patient. And through that can capture frontline insights. I mean, it's real-time market research that is happening on an ongoing basis, and it's really difficult to get that kind of real patient perspective in many other ways. The most sophisticated of players have begun to sort of design these easy e-consent portals so that patients can, opt in, and once they do agree to then share this data, that the service providers should be sharing this data back with pharma companies, obviously in a compliant manner. But this allows then pharma to be able to build sort of a different level of relationship and understanding of the patient. And throughout that patient engagement journey, we're continuing to capture this rich patient data. It's being collected through patient-provided insights. It's notes from the primary point of contact that's being captured in the CRM, patient-reported outcomes, pre- and post-surveys, and patient loyalty scores. So you have sort of this conglomerate of data that gives an idea of what's going on with that patient. And depending on how advanced a solution provider's technology and data management stack are, they're often able to then even apply natural language processing and other forms of AI to this captured data. Because you have all this rich data, now you need to glean actionable information that can then systematically be reported back to the client. This level of data sharing, again, it's sophisticated in pharma. It's table stakes in consumer products, but it allows the pharma company to have a more direct relationship with the patient, to get to know the needs and behaviors, to understand maybe misperceptions that they might have had, differences from what they were seeing in the clinical trial patients. It just allows sort of this better tailoring the patient services and then developing ways to communicate on an individual basis and level that really resonate with the patient. Okay, so I do think we're sort of only getting started with innovation in the patient engagement space. Again, I keep using consumer products, but we've got this holy grail to sort of lead us forward. And when I think about what patient engagement 2.0 will look like for the industry, there are some critical success factors of how to invest and design patient engagement models. First is aim to deliver an integrated experience, not only in patient services, but really should be across all of sort of marketing, communications, insight generation, and even forward-leaning around connected devices and wearables. Apply this global patient engagement investment lens while acting locally. And I love this. So continue investment in an enterprise level around services and strategies, while at the same time tailor actual patient engagement tactics down to the patient. That's what we all want, right? We want people to understand us and get us and complete us, right? Find ways to drive insights through data, AI, and machine learning. We have to be using this because there's just too much data to make sense of unless we are using, true technology to help us sort of sort through it all. The amount of data being obtained from channels and sources is continuing to grow. It's greater than it ever has been before, but it needs to be made more actionable. I think this is a given, but focus attention on outcomes like measuring increased therapy adherence versus prescription pull-through versus just on activity metrics of engagement. There still are so many folks, and I think service providers, that are just focusing on activity, and that doesn't really give any insight on what the impact is. Setting expectations that patient engagement investments are meant to improve outcomes ensures that you are capturing the right data and assessing the right KPIs with your service providers. And lastly, be open to ways to integrate the patient experience across healthcare constituents. More and more, I think we need that to find, I think that we are going to find that patient engagement models in biopharma will also include the involvement of, beyond pharma, in healthcare systems, payers, and others in the industry. And we have to look for ways that we're making that happen. I think the most important element to driving to this future state of world-class patient engagement is finding the right solution providers. Now that might be a little bit, subjective coming from me being a solution provider in this space, but I do think that if you don't have the right partner and you're not looking for sort of the right attributes, it's difficult then to get really the best-in-class patient engagement that you want. So for those things that you choose to outsource, these are some factors that you may want to consider that we at least think sort of are important when you're selecting a service provider. First, choose a best-in-breed partner. Providers that know not only what they can do, but maybe as much what they cannot do, and they're willing to speak up and share what they cannot do. I think in today's environment, there's so many companies that are sort of saying that they can do everything well, and we know that's not the case, and it almost begs the question of what can they do well if you're assuming that it all can be done well. Secondly, find partners that are willing and able to share data back with you. These are your patients. They should be empowering you. Your service providers need to be empowering you, the manufacturer, to have a direct relationship with your patients. And in doing so, they should also be able to seamlessly integrate into your systems, not force you to have to work in their infrastructure and their environment. And then lastly, it's that your partners that you work with should be responsive and set up to be able to embrace changes and pivot based on real-time learning and market conditions. Nothing is going to stay the same. Again, just a product launch in and of itself fundamentally changes the market. And so whatever was prepared pre-launch may not be appropriate into launch. So there has to be ways to not only be capturing what the changes need to be and capturing real-time learning, but there just has to be the agility and really providing mechanisms that can incorporate and pivot and allow folks to sort of change. And that has to be rooted in their culture of your service provider, as well as in the infrastructure of people and technology. So to deliver superior and differentiated patient engagement, we know there's no silver bullet. It's not easy, and by no means we know that it's going to be an ongoing journey. But with all that we're seeing happening with so many of our biopharma partners and happening across the market, now is the time for sort of putting the resources behind patient engagement. The innovations are there and they're in place, and they're helping to create an environment where pharma can truly delight their patients, like how we're delighted by our consumer products. Forward-leaning pharma companies and their solution providers are reimagining their business model and the role that they play in healthcare. They're introducing new thinking around outcomes, integrated care, and technology drug service combinations to forge these relationships with their patients that has the potential to truly bend the pharmaceutical value chain, drive category leadership and turn the vision of patient centricity into actual practice. So thank you so much for your time and for participating in polling and for just engaging in the discussion. And I hope there was something from here that resonated or made you think a little differently about patient engagement. And with that, I will send it back to you, Amber.
Thank you for such an informative presentation, Andi. Before we get started on the question and answer session, I would like to remind our audience just how to submit questions. Again, you can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found on the right-hand side of the presentation window. And now on to our first audience question. In the primary point of contact models, will the hub or SP still be talking to patients directly?
Okay, great question. Yes, I don't think I hit on this as much as I should have. I mean, first of all, it depends on the circumstances and what type of hub or SP model manufacturer is using, but there are always going to be folks that are going to be interacting with the patient, and that's why we call it sort of the primary point of contact versus the single point of contact. So, the goal is that everyone talk to patients as they need, so they can certainly be carrying out their normal activities and delivering on the services that they're focused on. But this primary contact, which could be a nurse, it could be a social worker, whatever that individual is either connected in and understanding what those activities, knows where the status of different activities, could be part of sort of warm transferring and staying with the patients. We've had models where patients aren't, that they haven't gotten their delivery, and instead of just, triaging them off to an SP, we'll stay with them on the call and then also help sort of translate what the SP might be saying to them, because it's not always in sort of the same patient language. And we just make sure so they know, again, this could be specific to a particular patient needs or and depending on if they've had these issues before. We know that it's important to sort of provide some extra hand-holding in certain circumstances, and honestly, with the delivery of product, that's been one that we've seen that be really important. But again, the role of this point is to be sort of this primary, consistent point of contact, but not to replace the services, not for others to not be interacting with the patient.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying on that. And now on to our next audience question. How do you integrate with the hub?
Great question. So, I mean, probably across the board, we do it through API feeds, so we can share sort of real-time information back and forth. But in addition to that, we're working together. I mean, there's almost sort of not a hub out there that we typically don't work with. And so we're working together to build sort of a strong, seamless partnership. And we're working through sort of well-defined processes to ensure this seamless data exchange and also just a good working relationship. So we look at sort of data flow design and gain understanding of the data flow for each of the partners. We look at integration design, collaboration, define the methods, the frequency for exchanging information, and even sort of the data structures of that information, and development and testing to ensure that data will flow as designed, and we make adjustments. We know that we can have these great plans, but we have to then, develop and then test and make sure that it works. We also believe it's really important to just have ongoing sort of set meetings with our hub partner. Sometimes they're necessary, sometimes they're not, but having a strong relationship, I think, across the whole PCP ecosystem with the different stakeholders who are involved it makes a big difference, and we think that's sort of kind of core to our responsibilities.
That makes sense. Thank you. Okay, so now someone else from our audience has a bit of a twofold question. It starts, are you working with companies who have a data aggregator to centralize the data? And if yes, how does that work in the primary point of contact model?
That's a great question. It's a really good question. Yes, we definitely are working with companies who have data aggregators to centralize the data. And so it's similar to sort of hub integration. We partner with our data aggregators all the time, and in those instances, we set up, API feeds with the data aggregator, and we share data back and forth to them. So it's really no different than what we would do in other circumstances. However, they would be obviously holding all the data. We're just ensuring that there's any data that we have or any kind of partnership that we have that maybe they wouldn't have or they didn't know. Sometimes they don't always have all the SP data that we might be capturing. So we're ensuring, it's our responsibility, again, the manufacturer should be getting all this data, and we believe that one of the key roles that we're playing as a service provider is enabling that to happen. And so either it be through the data aggregator who's then providing it and working and making sense of all that data and providing it to the manufacturer, or if we're sort of playing a key role often on aggregating and then the data and using our AI and machine learning to make sense of that data. Whatever it would be, we're aligned to ensuring that it's done in a seamless way. I hope that answers that question.
I think you did that a great job.
Okay, got it. I guess there is one other thing, though. The most important thing is to really sit down up front and determine data you need to capture and share, as well as aligning on data definitions. We often see sort of data definitions can be, can cause all kinds of problems. We're sort of talking past each other. So that's a key part, as well as working with our data aggregators and actually all of our partners.
Yes, I agree. Thank you for adding that. So now on to our next audience question. What do you think is the most challenging part of the implementing of the analytical models you're using?
Yeah, well, that's really good question. I have to think about that for a second. I think it's first about getting the right data and into this sort of the analytical models. I think here if we're talking about sort of risk assessment and the predictive analytics models that we've used, there's Experian data, there's claims data, there's all kinds of different data. So it's really sitting down up front and making sure that we're getting sort of a robust data set that is going to in fact inform the risk adherence assessment. You have to either sort of have access to that data, or many of our manufacturing partners invest to get these different data sets, particularly like Experian data. Everyone doesn't necessarily have that. And so it's pulling in sort of the right data. And then most of the analytical models that we're using, they've honestly been developed by others that we have then incorporated into sort of our algorithms. We've used IQVIA and a number of different folks, yes, on building these analytical models. We're just making sure they're then put into practice. So then we have to have the systems that are flexible and configurable so that we can build also triggers based on what comes out of those adherence scores and what sort of directs the types of interactions you want to have based on not only the predictive analytics piece, but also then that we're incorporating preferences and learning style and all of that into our models.
Those are great points. Thank you so much, Andi. So just looking at the time, I think we have time for one more audience question. So you mentioned just-in-time triggers. What types of triggers have you seen to be most effective in your program so far?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. So there's a number of different just-in-time triggers, and I actually think they're not used nearly enough. I think they're incredibly important because you're making sure this moment doesn't pass where a patient could drop off therapy, and you can actually provide an intervention that ensures that, one, that they're getting the support that they might need at that moment, and that time doesn't go by so that it's too difficult to actually keep them on to therapy. So the first one is just first RX abandonment. I think that is a key trigger if we're seeing that the patient hasn't ever started on therapy. And one of the biggest areas we're seeing right now is identifying triggers earlier into this patient journey. So triggers around not just first RX abandonment, but also did they not receive their medication shipment? That could be on the first or second or third, or a trigger that identifies an issue with even a medication approval, so that we can reach out and even give that patient sort of an update on what's happening with reimbursement. And there's so many times that we forget that the patients aren't in the loop on maybe some complicated PA situations, and just trying to be thoughtful about if you get a new piece of information, just letting them know what's going on, lets them know that somebody's thinking about them. We also have in the clinical trial space as well, like diagnostic triggers, where if there needs to be a follow-up diagnostic that needs to happen and the patient has not conducted that will reach out and give that again, this sort of behavioral nudge, or see what it is that's sort of holding them back from getting either the right kind of testing that's necessary so that they can continue on therapy. I think that hopefully that answers your question. Actually, I do think that all of these type of triggers can enable either clinical nurse educator, again, or the social worker, or whoever's playing that role, to provide this kind of proactive outreach to the patient, either, as I said, explaining what's going on, but most importantly, just to provide support when patients need it. And we believe that that can happen in an automated way, or it can happen through human interaction. So there you go.
Excellent, Andi. Thank you so much. But unfortunately, we're out of time for today. But I would like to thank the audience for attending and for participating in today's event. And I'd also like to thank our sponsor, VMS Biomarketing, for making today's educational webcast possible. So now we'd like to ask everyone in the audience to participate in a brief survey from our sponsor, which you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll also receive an email alerting you when this webcast will be available for replay, and we invite you to forward that announcement to your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. Once again, thanks to all for joining, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thanks, Amber.